Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're heading back to Detroit, mid-1980s. We're looking at a really, well, a pretty stock story about a criminal group that basically took over a huge chunk of the city's drug trade, the Chambers brothers.
Yeah, it's a fascinating case study. We've got a lot to dig into here. Sources from, major newspapers like Time, the New York Times, Chicago Tribune.
Orlando Sentinel, too. Plus, some deeper dives from places like gangsterreport.com, university archives, local history sites.
Right? And even things like a Blog Talk Radio interview, a book excerpt, Land of Opportunity from University of Michigan Press, a documentary clip, Wikipedia. A pretty wide net.
Definitely. So our mission today really is to get a handle on how this family, these four brothers, managed to build such a dominant crack cocaine operation in Detroit. What did it actually look like? And, what eventually brought them down?
And also touching on their kind of cultural footprint afterwards, which is surprisingly significant.
Exactly. You hear lots of stories about big drug operations, but the Chambers brothers, it's this weird intersection of family, ambition, and just the sheer explosion of the crack epidemic in a major American city. It's unique.
It really is. And when you start looking through these sources, what jumps out immediately is the scale, but also how methodical it was. This wasn't just random.
No, it sounds almost like a business in a disturbing way, highly structured.
Yeah, surprisingly sophisticated for the time, really.
Okay, so let's get into it. The court, like you said, four brothers, Larry, Billy Joe, Willie Lee, and Otis Chambers. And they weren't even from Detroit originally, Arkansas, right?
Marianna, Arkansas, that's where they started. And the consistent theme in the sources is the poverty they saw there.
Yeah.
That seems to be the main driver.
So they looked north to Detroit. Why Detroit specifically, besides the obvious market?
Well, the crack scene was just starting to explode there. They saw an opportunity, a huge one. And their initial move was pretty calculated. They went back to Marianna.
And recruited.
Yeah, recruited guys they knew. Offered them $500 a week, which back then in that area.
That was serious money, a massive draw.
Absolutely. It was way out, or at least that's how it's probably seen. So they built this network based on those hometown connections. It's a specific kind of, ambition, using community ties for an illegal enterprise.
And it clearly worked in terms of getting people. By the mid-'80s, the scale, some sources say they controlled over half of Detroit's crack trade.
50%. It's staggering, supplying something like 700 crack houses daily.
700 daily. Wow. How do you even manage that, the logistics alone?
It's hard to fathom. And the money. Estimates are around $3 million a day.
$3 million a day. That's empire territory.
It really was. And it wasn't just luck. The sources, especially things like the university archives and police reports mentioned in the news articles, they stressed the organization. They found actual org charts.
Organization charts, like a company.
Yeah, and even like gang bylaws found in some of the houses. It shows a level of structure you wouldn't necessarily expect. Clear chain of command, accountability.
Oh, I imagine accountability meant something pretty brutal.
Well, yes, that's the other side.
Yeah.
But that structure, that management style was probably key to their efficiency and control compared to, less organized groups.
Right. It wasn't just chaos. They had rules. The Orlando Sentinel mentioned dealers being told very specifically, no flashy jewelry, no expensive sneakers, keep a low profile.
Exactly. Almost pragmatic, wasn't it? Minimize attention, maintain security. They understood that part.
But the enforcement, that's where it gets dark.
Extremely dark. The sources are pretty clear. Beatings, shootings. That was the punishment for breaking rules or if the money was short.
So ruthless efficiency.
That's a good way to put it. It highlights the brutality needed to keep that kind of operation in line.
Mm-hmm.
Control through fear, essentially.
A chilling mix of business sense and, violence. So this empire seemed unstoppable for a while, but obviously it wasn't. What started the cracks? How did the DEA get involved?
It took time. The downfall really culminates in February 1988. That's when the arrests happened. But it was after a long investigation, 18 months.
18 months, so a major effort.
A huge joint effort. DEA
Yeah.
and Detroit police working together. And when they finally moved in, the scale of the bust, as reported in the New York Times and elsewhere, was immense.
What did they seize?
Okay, get this. $1 million in cash and jewelry, 68 vehicles, 250 weapons.
250 guns. It's an arsenal.
It really is. And 6 kilograms of cocaine on top of that. It was a massive blow.
You'd think so. That level of seizure must have crippled them. And the legal fallout followed pretty fast.
Relatively, yeah.
Right.
By March 1989, they were convicted, running a continuing criminal enterprise, basically, covering 82 to 88.
And the sentences? Heavy, I assume.
Very heavy, reflected the scale, you know. Larry, the reported leader, got life plus a $250,000 fine.
Life.
Okay. Billy Joe got 45 years and a $500,000 fine. Otis, 27 years and $350K fine. And Willie, 21 years, also a $350K fine.
Wow. Those are serious number. That effectively ended it, right? The leadership was gone.
Pretty much dismantled the core of the operation, yes. Brought that specific reign to a definitive end.
Now, these 4 brothers were the center, obviously. But the sources mention other family, too, right? It wasn't just them in a vacuum.
That's right. There were 3 sisters and also twin brothers. Interestingly, one of the twins, Frederick, took a completely different path.
Oh, yeah. What did he do?
Became a military drill sergeant out in California. It's quite a contrast, isn't it? Shows how different paths can emerge from the same family, even amidst deep criminal involvement.
Definitely. And the family eventually moved.
To Memphis, Tennessee, yeah.
Yeah.
As mentioned. But even with the brothers locked up, their notoriety didn't just fade away. Those videotapes helped make sure of that.
Ah, yes. The famous tapes, laundry baskets full of cash. That image is powerful.
It really is. Several sources describe them vividly. It's almost surreal, isn't it? Just flaunting these unbelievable amounts of money. It cemented their gangster image.
You have to wonder about the logistics of just handling that much cash every day. Maybe that became a problem in itself.
Could be. Those tapes definitely captured the public's imagination, though. The Blog Talk Radio interview probably touched on that sensational aspect, the sheer audacity of it all.
Right. The sources also mention their mother passed away in 2003. Given how family-centric the operation seemed, that must have been significant, though maybe less documented in terms of impact on the incarcerated brothers.
True. The sources focus more on the operational years and the downfall. But it's a human element amidst the crime story.
So, beyond the actual crimes and the trial, the Chambers brothers' story really bled into popular culture, didn't it? Several sources point this out.
Oh, absolutely. It had a definite ripple effect. There's a novel, Warpath, by Jeffrey Scott Hansen.
Right, I saw that mentioned.
Yeah, it features a group called the 6 Mile Syndicate, and it's acknowledged they're loosely based on the Chambers brothers. So, their real story directly inspired fiction.
And then there's the big one. New Jack City.
Exactly. The 1991 movie, iconic.
Yeah.
Wikipedia, and frankly, lots of articles about the film or the gang explicitly state that Nino Brown,
Wesley Snipes a character.
yeah, Nino Brown and his whole crew, the Cash Money Brothers, largely modeled on the Chambers brothers and their organization.
That's incredible. And that film was huge. It really shaped how a lot of people saw drug gangs in that era.
It absolutely did. And the connection is even more direct. Remember the Carter complex in the movie, Nino's fortified base?
Yeah, the apartment building they took over?
Well, the Chambers brothers actually did something very similar. They took control of a real apartment building in Detroit called the Broadmoor.
No kidding. Same tactic.
Same tactic. On East Grand Boulevard and Ferry Street. The sources confirmed this was a major hub for their drug operations. It's a striking real-life parallel that made it straight into the movie.
Wow. That really blurs the line, doesn't it? Real events feeding directly into these huge cultural moments.
It does. And for listeners wanting more of the straight story, there's that BT documentary series, American Gangster. They had an episode specifically on the Chambers brothers.
Right, that'd be a good source, too. And that Time magazine article from '88, I'm Going to Detroit, that gave a real contemporary look at what was happening.
Yeah, it captured the story as it was breaking, pretty much. All these things together just show how much impact the Chambers brothers had beyond just Detroit crime statistics. Their story resonated nationally.
It became a touch point for discussing drug trafficking, the crack epidemic, the impact on cities, and how pop culture reflects and maybe sometimes glorifies these things.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so wrapping this up, we've traced the Chambers brothers from their roots in Arkansas poverty to building this incredibly organized and brutal crack empire in Detroit in the mid-'80s.
An empire controlling a massive share of the market, making millions daily, run with surprising structure but enforced with violence.
Until that huge 18-month investigation brought it all down. Arrests, seizures, long prison sentences for the core 4 brothers.
Effectively ending their run, yeah. But their story, as we saw, lived on. It had this significant afterlife in popular culture, especially inspiring New Jack City.
It's quite the trajectory, the audacity, the organization, the downfall. It all contributes to why we're still talking about them.
Definitely. It's a key story for understanding that whole era.
So here's a final thought. When you look at the sheer scale, the almost corporate structure they implemented, how it mirrored legitimate business in some ways, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it, about the bigger picture. What societal factors allowed an enterprise like that to explode in that time and place? What does the whole story, the ambition, the opportunity they saw, the path they took, tell us about, I don't know, the darker side of the American dream? Something to think about.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.